That's why the two of us are here. What you don't remember, I'll try to remember, and vice versa. What I can't remember, you're going to remember.
And I appreciate that, Harry. We were the Young Turks from Annapolis. We were not part of the Baltimore establishment at all. We had Pietro Beluschi as a mentor. We had Jim Rouse as a mentor. The 60s were a troubling yet invigorating decade. The election of Jack Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, the Martin Luther King marches and so forth. I mean, we were in turmoil. Yet after Martin Luther King was assassinated, several cities, Los Angeles, Detroit, Washington, and Baltimore, to name just a few, they erupted. It was frustration and anger. And we were just appalled at what was happening on Park Avenue and also North Avenue here in Baltimore. But there was no vehicle for how to address the issue. No one had sort of had a chance to step forward.
City government were somewhat isolated from the majority of the black community, primarily because just the way things were, we had not grown out of the conditions prior.
For architects, it was an opportunity because we were starting to rewrite the book on certain social programs. We heard Tom McCall, the governor of Oregon. He was very visionary and was quite effective in speaking to the architects, but Whitney Young was the one that admonished the architects to get in there.
Whitney Young, what sort of implanted the spark in Charlie, and then it was a matter of, just having something said to you or a challenge or a gauntlet thrown down is one thing. The difference is somebody then has to act on that, either because circumstances force you to act or because you provide the leadership that I mentioned by not being forced to do it, but because there's something innate in possibly your social responsibilities that you feel, whatever the case might be.
Walter Lively said, what can the AIA do to help us? We need help desperately. Walter Lively contacted Dave O'Malley, and Dave O'Malley spoke with me, and I sort of represented to him the AIA because I was chairman of the Urban Design Committee, and we had similar discussions along the way. It was a thin thread back then to get this thing going. I thought that this was something the AIA should be involved in, and I made a case for the AIA to come forth.
You had a great expectation in the leadership represented by the Urban Design Committee and Charlie and others. And then afterwards, it was a matter, hey, what are we actually going to do? It's one thing to pronounce and then one thing to lead by pronouncement, but you have to then physically do something to show that there is more than just talk going on.
We were all selling the idea, trying to create the funding mechanisms. We had a good idea, and there was a need, and we had a growing number of volunteers. But in the beginning, how many? 20?
Maybe something in that area. And while you were doing that, Dave was putting the nonprofit charter together in our bylaws and trying to organize how NDC would take on a client, under what conditions, and then how would we fulfill those expectations, what would we do to provide the client. And that was the formative things that were going on after your leadership initially. Then during that interim period of a couple of years, that's what was physically happening at the office.
You were invaluable at that moment.
No. Dave had most of that one. And Frank and Dave had a lot of that.
There was an important policy decision back at the beginning, and that was that the volunteer NDC should not be in competition with the private sector of architects. I mean, we're asking architects to volunteer and contribute money, and here we turn around and we are a potential threat if we don't spell out just exactly how we would go about. And the idea of being the seed operation, to being the initial getting the projects underway to the point where funding of whatever private or public source was available, then the architectural community, the private sector architects, could pick up the project. I feel like I helped start something, and then I picked it up somewhat later before I retired, but I don't deserve any more credit than what I deserve.